So with that, I will say that is, I'm not sure if that's like a common assumption. What's up guys, it's PC Minor 101 here, and I'm back at it again for another video. Today's video is all about type 1 diabetes and a little bit of a Q&A, a chatty video. So I posted a bunch of stories on my Instagram and got people to I asked people a bunch of questions about diabetes, just so I can see what knowledge people have and what people know, and like the media, just kind of, as well as like to clear assumptions up and to educate people, because I've been doing that a little bit on my TikTok, which I will put a link. There is a link to that in the description and I will put it on screen, which I've been doing a little bit of videos about it on, but I thought I wanted to do a more in-depth video on here as well. First thing I will say, before I go into it, is that I have been newly diagnosed as diabetic, type 1 diabetic, since October-ish, September time last year. So I have been diabetic for a couple of months now. It's not the first video I've mentioned it on camera, but I have had it for a couple of months now, so I've learned a lot, and there's still a lot more for me to learn, but I know kind of most things to kind of be able to just do a video like this. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing I asked people was the definition, what, in their own kind of words, what they think that type 1 diabetes is. So type 1 diabetes is a autoimmune condition, which autoimmune means that your body attacks itself and then you end up with something. So with this, my body has somehow attacked my insulin making cells and stopped them from producing insulin. So my body now no longer produces insulin. My pancreas is just dead. I have to be a human pancreas and inject myself with insulin in order to stay alive. So insulin obviously helps your body with your blood, your sugar, your glucose, and you know, without it, as I said, it does what obviously my body did do for a couple of months, just run really high blood sugars. So we need it to survive, so we have to do it ourselves. And you can get it at any age, but it is more common in younger children and in a younger age group. You can get it as an adult any age, because I'm 22 and I was diagnosed at 22. So, but there's no way that you can prevent type 1. There's no cure, and it isn't a fault of your own. It just happens. And genetics can play a part in it, but they're not like the 100%. This is why you get it, because of that. So I have diabetes in my dad's side of the family, but that's not the sole purpose of how I got it. I just got it because my body decided to attack itself, because I might have had some sort of illness, virus, and my body's attacked the wrong thing. I will read out the 4 responses I got. I think that type 1 diabetes is a condition where the body does not produce insulin. Yeah, pretty much. The body does not produce insulin. It is an auto issue that stops the body from producing insulin. So they've kind of got the autoimmune thing there, but again, they are right. Diabetes that is genetic, where you must inject insulin several times per day. Again, the genetic, it's not 100%, but injecting several times a day is correct. Now, minimum, I inject 4 times a day, but if I need to do any sort of correction dose, then I will do it more, because it's 1 per meal and then before bed. So just by reading these responses, I kind of feel like the definition, you know, I feel like that's not kind of misplaced. People do know roughly a little bit of it, so that's quite good, and I kind of like that, and I'm happy with how that part's kind of turned out. So the next topic was knowledge. So this is where I asked people, what do they know about type 1 diabetes? So it's not necessarily the definition, but it's what they know. Like, is there anything they know about it in terms of managing it, etc.? Sugar level can rise and drop and has to be managed by injection. Yes, that is true. There's loads of factors, which is why our sugar levels can drop and to rise. Insulin manages our sugar level, and to keep them in range, we have to give ourselves specific amount of units per meal. People with type 1 diabetes take insulin every day to manage blood sugar level. Yes, that is basically it. Type 1 diabetes is passed down genetically and you have to take insulin. So again, with the genetics, it's not like 100% that is the sole like thing of it. Genetics plays a big part in it, as it's mainly to do with the fact that the body and it being autoimmune. People need injections and specialized food and prone to injury more. So this is quite an interesting one. As a diabetic, there's no specialized kind of food that we have that's good for diabetics. We can just eat the same food as any non-diabetic would. We just have to have the insulin for it, and obviously like portion everything and carb count and everything like that. The injury more, that is quite interesting. That's not necessarily the case, so I'm not kind of sure where that's come from. I think that kind of got mixed up a little bit, because that's not necessarily the case. It's more of, if we do hurt ourselves, we have to make sure that that injury, like if we cut ourselves, like if we fell and broke and like cut my arm open or grazed my foot or something, or there's something that comes up on our foot or something, we have to make sure that it is healing as it should properly, because that is kind of a symptom of it, is that the body, it takes longer to heal things. So that is kind of it. So we have to make sure the body is healing properly. So I think that's where it's kind of got a bit confused maybe. I know the terms hypo and hyper, and regarding blood sugar levels. That is a good bit of knowledge to have, especially if someone very close to you has type 1 diabetes. It's good to know a little bit, you know, it's good to educate yourself and know a little bit about it, but we'll get into that further on. So the next thing I have is assumptions. So with this, it's just what people have heard or what they assume about type 1 diabetes, and I'm going to basically debunk these, whether they are true or whether they're not, because a lot of the times, a lot of the assumptions people do have are like really kind of common ones. Anyone can get it at any age. Now that is a good assumption. Anyone can get it at any age, yes. It is more common in younger, like being younger to get it, but you can get it as an adult, as I am proof of that, as being 22. And I know I've seen people online that have posted about it when they got it and they were older than me. Same as type 2. So with that, I will say that is, I'm not sure if that's like a common assumption, but I think the assumption is that not a lot of people know the difference between the both of them, which that will be coming to that at a later time in the video, but not a lot of people know that. So that is quite a common one, but I will have to say that that is false. The only similarity between the two is the insulin, that the body has trouble with insulin, but how it's managed, the symptoms, what you have to deal with each one is completely different. People with it can't eat sugar. That is a false assumption. Now that is quite a common one. I feel like that circulates around a lot. We can eat sugar because sugar saves our life if we are low and gets our blood sugar levels to go up, but on a normal basis we can eat sugar. But the only thing that I do is I make sure I portion it out. So if I'm having like a sugary donut like this big, then I will have a quarter of it. I won't eat the whole thing in one kind of bit. I'll have a little bit at a time. So I'll portion out so that if I had the whole thing in one, yeah, I'd probably spike. Caused by diet. Now that is where the two get confused. That is type 2, that is not type 1. Type 1, there's no cause apart from that your body attacks itself. That's why you have it. It's nothing to do with a fault of your own. You can't like self-inflict it on yourself. Only affects kids. That is not necessarily true. It is more common in kids, but you can have it whenever in life. Can't eat a lot of stuff that everyone else can. Now this is an assumption because of the fact that carbs and stuff, and we have to monitor our food, but we can still eat what everyone else can eat. We can still go to a carvery and have a carvery. We can still have some popcorn at the cinema and a slush or something. You know, we can still eat what everyone else can. We just have to make sure that we've got the insulin for that. The only thing I would say that we can't kind of eat is when you watch those kind of videos where people get like a massive like whole like big table of food to themselves, and they'll get like loads of pizzas, loads of stuff, and they'll do these food challenges or just foods like that in general where they'll have like a big massive banquet for themselves. And things like that I would probably not, and we'd probably have to be careful of our portion sizes. So yeah, that's kind of, hopefully that's kind of summed that up a little bit. Must watch all food and drink to make sure blood sugar level doesn't spike. Now there's two ways I can go about this, which is one, your blood sugar level doesn't always necessarily spike with food. So when it says watching all food to make sure your blood sugar level doesn't spike, food and drink doesn't always spike. It's not like the main thing that spikes your blood sugar level. I'll go into that later. Anything can cause your blood sugar level to spike as well as food, which people don't realise. But obviously we do have to kind of monitor our food and drink to make sure that we're given the right amount of insulin for that so that it doesn't spike it after we've eaten. So it's kind of like a bit of 50-50 of that one. Very common. Now this I would say is a false assumption. I would not say that type 1 is very common. I would say type 2 is the one that's more common for people to get. There's a lot of factors that can cause you to get type 2 compared to type 1. So I would say that type 1 is not common. It is common. People with it are overweight and unhealthy. Now that is type 2, and that's not type 1. Exercising is dangerous. Exercising isn't dangerous, but it can be dangerous. So it depends on what exercise it is you're doing and the level of intensity that you're doing it at. So if you're doing a hike up a really steep mountain compared to doing weights at the gym, they're going to affect you differently. So you just have to make sure you know how certain exercise affects you and your levels and what you need to do to kind of be able to still do those exercises but not like have too much of a bad effect on your blood sugar level. That is something that you do get kind of help with through your nurse or hospital clinic. But yeah, so it's not that it is, but it can be if you're not monitoring your levels very closely. The next thing I'm going to go into, which is one of the more important things, is hypoglycemia or hypos. Hypos are very important, and if you don't treat them and they're not managed, you can get extremely unwell, end up in hospital. So hypos are when your blood sugar drops to a level below 4 mmol. That is what I go by in the UK. I know I've seen a lot of American people on TikTok that go through a different unit of managing their blood sugar. I don't know what the name of that one is, but ours is mmol, so it's below 4, and that is classed as low blood sugar. And low blood sugar can happen. There's a lot of different things that can cause it. It can be caused by just the weather. It can be caused by not eating enough carbs in your previous meal, or alcohol. You know, if you're not well, you know, your period, for all the ladies out there, periods can cause it. Your mood, if you're stressed, anxious. I know with me, my blood sugars tend to run lower when I'm on my period, and they just stick. Like they're really they just don't move. They're stubborn. So it really depends on the person, and you can avoid them, but not 100%. Like you can avoid them by trying to make sure you don't drink too much alcohol, by you're not skipping meals, but they can still happen. And to treat a hypo, you need to make sure you have between 15 to 20 grams of fast acting carbs. So that can be anything. That can be apple juice, orange juice, sweets, glucose gel or tablets people sometimes use. And then you have to rest. It's advised to rest for 10 to 15 minutes and then test yourself, and then repeat if your blood sugar is still not budged. And then if it has treated it, you have to have 15 to 20 grams of slow acting carbs. That could be some toast, a sandwich, some fruit, milk, anything like that. Obviously, if you are due a meal, then you can have your meal. If not, then have something like that that's like a snack to get you towards your next meal so you don't drop again. Low blood sugar is sugar. So if you're low, you need sugar. The symptoms can be different for everyone. Sometimes with low blood sugars, with hypos, you don't always get symptoms. So if you do have a CGM and, you know, your symptoms don't match with it, it's saying you're low but you don't feel it, or the way around, always do a finger prick test just to check. But the symptoms can be like shakiness, kind of looking like you're in more of like a drunk manner, hunger, sweat, you know, kind of your vision going blurry, a rapid heartbeat, you know, kind of dizziness, losing focus, things like that. And it can lead you to feeling very unwell. If someone experiences a low, treat quickly by consuming things like glucose tablets, etc. Yes, that is true. If someone does experience a low, they need to treat it as quickly as possible. Glucose tablets are a good way of treating a low, as I said. It doesn't always have to be sugary things. It makes you unwell. That is true. When you have if you do experience symptoms of a low, you can feel very unwell, and it is urgent that you treat it. Look for shakiness, sweat, hunger, blurred vision, pale skin, and a rapid heartbeat. That is good that someone actually knows the symptoms and what to look out for. That is true. You can get that. And obviously some of the others I've mentioned as well. And it's good you know the symptoms. Blood sugars are high. That is the other way around. So that's not hypo. That is something completely different. When your blood sugar level drops too low, you get dizziness and shaking. Yes, that is correct. When your blood sugar level drops too low, yes. Low blood sugar, need sugar, more sugar foods and carb foods. So more sugary foods is correct. Obviously, when I or any diabetic does experience a low, we do need more sugar foods. Carby foods, that isn't to treat a low per se. We'd only eat more carby foods after correcting a low to stop ourselves from going any lower. But apart from that, that statement is correct in terms of we do need more sugary foods to help us correct the low, basically. So everyone's kind of hit the nail on the head with that. With me personally, when I experience hypos, because I'm still quite new to it, I don't get a lot of symptoms. The only ones I only seem to get is shakiness, is the more common one that I get. And sometimes it'll be like loss of focus or dizziness. And sometimes I do get the hunger, the hypohunger as I call it. So it's good that that is known and people do know about that. So now I'm going to talk about differences between type 1 and type 2. So this is why I've asked people, do you know the difference and how each one affects each person? Because I think this is where people get confused. So type 1, obviously, as I said, you do not produce insulin at all, and it is no fault of your own. Type 2 is where your body does not produce enough insulin, and type 2 is caused more by, you know, it's more on your genetics, your age, your weight, your diet, you know, how healthy you are. It's more in like, you know, if you're like overweight, you can cause type 2. But obviously if you're on the path to being, you know, to going toward that way, you can reverse it or stop it. And that one is the more genetic one. And genetics can increase your chances of getting type 1, but it's not the full sole cause. Type 2, you don't need to inject, you just have meds. Obviously type 1 you do need to inject, but type 2 can turn into type 1. And sometimes type 2 you can have to start injecting, but most people with it don't. You know, high blood pressure as well, things like that can affect type 2. And obviously there is no cure for type 2, but you can reverse it if you are going down that route, or, you know, if you've got it, you can, you know, a doctor can work with you to reverse it a little bit by changing up, you know, your weight, your diet, things like that. So that being said, that's kind of the difference between them both. So they're both extremely different. Type 1 I would say is more of a severe, because you have all of these different things. One is genetic and the other is self-inflicted by eating loads of sugar. Now that I would say it's partly because type 1 isn't genetic, and type 2 I don't think it's based on specifically eating loads of sugar. It's more of just having a poor diet as a general and being overweight. So it's not necessarily mainly sugar, if you know what I mean. So I feel like that's kind of been a bit like 50-50. Type 2 diabetes is genetic and the body becomes resistant to insulin and can't produce it. Now, that is kind of true. Your body does become insulin resistant as a type 2 diabetic, but that doesn't mean your body can't produce it. It's just not producing enough for you. But type 2, yes, genetics do play a big part of that. Type 1, you have to inject, and type 2, you have tablets. That is correct. Type 2, you take medication for that, and type 1, you have to inject. But obviously, with type 2, it can turn into type 1, or it can turn into the point where you do need injections. But most of the cases, you can take meds to manage it. Type 1 diabetes is not genetic, destroys insulin producing cells, and attacks the body's immune system. That is true. Insulin type 1 is not genetic, and yes, it does destroy your cells, and that's how you get it. Type 1, your body doesn't produce enough insulin, and type 2, your body does not react to insulin. Type 1, your body obviously does not produce it at all. It's not that it doesn't produce enough, that's type 2. But type 2, your body does react to insulin, it just becomes quite resistant and it still produces it a little bit. Higher blood sugar, more severe symptoms, and more difficult insulin production. Now, I'm not really sure in terms of highs and lows how that is with type 2. I know it's more serious with type 1, but yes, you can get more severe symptoms with type 1 because of the fact that you could end up severely ill and end up in hospital because you're not managing you're getting really highs and you end up in DKA, or you're really low. The difficulty of producing insulin is obviously, more severe with type 1 because you can't. It was like kind of a little bit with that one. Type 2 is more common in overweight people who can't inject and take meds. So type 2, it is, yes, more common in overweight people, but it's not that they can't inject, it's just they don't necessarily need to. Meds is the way that it's basically managed. It just helps them with that insulin. And so I feel like, again, a little bit of stuff has been mixed up with type 1 and type 2, but I do feel like the generic thing is there, but it does get a little bit mixed up between the two. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the opposite of a hypo, and it's a hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia is when your blood sugar spikes and is really high, and I would say that is more than 10, and if it's say more than 13 or 14 for a long amount of time, then you have more possible chance of going into DKA. So high blood sugar happens not just by food. Obviously, if you do eat something and your injection isn't enough, then yes, it can spike your blood sugar, or if you don't inject at all. Stress can also do it. Obviously, eating more carbs than your body can handle for a meal, that can kind of cause your blood sugar to spike. If you overcorrect a hypo, which is what I kind of constantly do, that can cause it to be high blood sugar. You can end up sick, and you can be unwell with it. And the symptoms of high blood sugar is mainly just, feeling sick, weight loss, your vision can become blurry, tiredness, headaches, you can get irritable, thirsty, needing the loo a lot. And obviously, it can happen, like the weather as well can affect it, the environmental factors and things. Being ill is a big thing with it. So the main thing is, when you are ill, to follow the sick day rules that you have discussed with your doctor, and to make sure you take insulin even if you're not eating anything. And obviously I mentioned something called DKA, that is called diabetic ketoacidosis. So having high blood sugar, people might think, oh, it's not as bad as low, but high blood sugar can kill us as well and cause us to end up severely ill, because DKA and ketones. So that basically is when that is caused by lack of insulin. So you're not taking your insulin, so then your body builds up ketones, which eats your fat, and then you end up with sugar in your urine because your body is trying to cope. And DKA can end up being serious, and it's more common if, when you're ill and you're ill for a long period of time and your body is just, your sugar level is just staying high and it's quite stubborn. That's when you need to follow the what you've been told. in terms of monitoring your ketones and also, you know, your sugar level. DK can cause you to pass out, be confused, get stomach pains, needing a wee a lot, sickness, stomach, like things like that. And then you could end up in hospital with fluids, nutrients, or even just insulin drips in your veins because it can be that bad. So high blood sugar is just as dangerous. High blood sugar, you take insulin for it to come down. And so people get confused because people think that low blood sugar is when you need insulin, which is not the case. When you're high, insulin is the main thing that you can do to bring your sugar levels down by doing correction doses, things like that. If you've already done insulin recently, you can drink a lot of water and just naturally let the sugar go out through when you go to the toilet. You can do some light walking or jogging on, whether it's outside. I do it on a walking pad. That can also help you with your high blood sugar to bring it down. And I find that cleaning sometimes brings my high sugar down, but some things work differently for other people. But I do get quite a lot of stubborn highs. It occurs when blood sugar level is too high and there is nausea and increased thirst. Yes, that is true. High blood sugar, you get thirsty and tired. Yes. High blood sugar, you need to inject insulin. That is true. When blood sugar level drops, I assume it's shakes, headaches, dizziness, fainting, etc. That is another bit of confusion. That is low blood sugar, not high blood sugar. So I would say that it is a lot of the symptoms of high blood sugar are known here. So the next thing that I've asked people is whether or not it is talked about, whether it's in the media, like do they feel like it's talked about enough? And most people have said no. Someone even said that the schools don't really teach it, the media doesn't talk about it, that it's highly misunderstood. And then someone else has said that they didn't really heard of it, they didn't really know what it was, or they'd never heard of it until they knew a diabetic in their primary school. So with that, I feel like that is one of the more disappointing things of this. I kind of learned with this, people do know slightly a little bit here and there, but not the whole picture. But I feel like with this is why I do what I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm talking about it here, and that, you know, type 2 is the one that's more talked about. Type 1 is the more severe one. That is something that I'm trying to work on by talking about it on here on my TikTok, which I've said, which I will plug in the description. But yeah, that's kind of quite a sad thing that it's not talked about in schools, and I feel like that's something that needs to be implemented, because if you know someone that has it and they're getting a hypo and a hyper, it's good to know what you can do to help them and understand it a bit more. There was one thing I forgot to say of hypers, which is high blood sugar can affect your eyesight, and it can cause you to go blind if you don't get it monitored and checked, things like that. The next thing, and the last thing I've got on here, I'm pretty sure, is the question side. So this is where I've asked people on Instagram what questions they have got for me, and I just said there's no such thing as like a stupid question to ask me if there's anything they want to know. So this is where I will answer as best I can in my experience. No type 1 diabetic is the same, so what, you know, my experience might be different to other people's. So without further ado, let's get into the first question. How can it be managed if you don't have your insulin pen on you? Now that is a good question, but unfortunately, unless you are on an insulin pump which delivers your insulin automatically based on how much carbs you tell it that you've eaten, you can't manage it without insulin on you. That's why they always recommend to carry your insulin pens and some needles around with you, because you never know if you're going to need them. But without them, and if you're someone like me that's not on a pump yet, then you can't manage it, I'm afraid. So that's why you always need to remember to have them in backups and just everything, and be prepared. How often should someone with type 1 diabetes check that their blood sugar levels? Now that is a good one. Now it is advised that we check our sugar levels before we eat a meal and before we go to bed and when we wake up on a normal day. If during that day we're also going for a drive, then we have to check it before we do that as well. If we're going to do some exercise, we have to keep checking it throughout that as well. And when I say normal, I mean just a day where you just sat at home, you're not really kind of doing much. But I check mine more than normal, to be honest. Obviously, again, if your symptoms don't match up with your CGM, then you check it as well as then. If you're not feeling right, you check it. But yeah, it is recommended just kind of before you're about to do your injections and stuff to check it, just to see what your level is, so you know how much insulin, like if you're really high and you're about to eat a meal, you know how much insulin you need for the meal and then how much to bring it down, etc. What lifestyle changes can help you manage your diabetes? Now, I'm not really too sure about that one. I mean, obviously, in terms of our lifestyle, we can still do everything other people can do. We can still exercise, we can still eat whatever we want with insulin, obviously. We can still go out drinking. We just have to have a lot of procedures in place for each different things. We can still drive, go on holiday, you know, enjoy our lives. I would say, like, helping manage it, I would say, you know, you can change what you eat in terms of the portions. So with me, I have kind of changed my portion sizes when it comes to sugary things now. So the lifestyle changes would kind of be to help manage it, would be to kind of, if you're having something that's sugary, like chocolate or sweets or whatever, to kind of portion it differently than what you would normally. Obviously, to help manage it, you have to cut out sugary drinks unless it's for a hypo treatment. And I don't really know what else I can think of, really. So that's a bit of a random one, actually, and it's a good question, but I just don't know much else. What should be done in an emergency for hypos and hypers? That is a good question, because I feel like a lot of people do not know this. Do your research, I would say, so you know what a hypo is, what a hyper is, the difference, the symptoms they could be feeling, what needs to be done to help them, and how you can support them with that, so that when you do get into a situation where there's an emergency, you can distinguish whether it's a hypo or a hyper. Then obviously, depending on what it is, will be depending on how you help them. So in the case that you have someone close to you and they're having an emergency and it's a hypo, you need to make sure that you're there to support them, because hypos can make you extremely ill depending on what symptoms you get. It's one of those things you need to treat quickly. So you need to distinguish how low they are. You know, are they severely low, where the fact that you need to take them to a hospital and an A&E, or, you know, because sometimes if it is that bad of a low and nothing is helping it go up, then they need to go to a hospital. But first of all, you need to get something that's sugar. So you need to give them sugar. So whether that is a full sugar Coke or full sugar drink, or if it's something like orange juice or apple juice, liquids can get in the bloodstream quicker, so something like that. Or if they have anything on them like glucose tablets or gel, just offer that to them and say you need to make sure that they are taking that. Sugary sweets, jelly babies, sugar sweets, I always have Haribos on me, as that's something that helps me. So make sure you give them something sugary, and then be there to support them, because they're gonna be feeling the symptoms and not gonna be feeling themselves. So make sure you're there supporting them through it. And obviously, when I was explaining the hypo, it is recommended with hypos that you wait 10 to 15 minutes. So obviously, after you've given them the fast acting carbs, you wait 10 to 15 minutes to give the sugar that you've just given them a chance that it's hit their system. And then I would say, if it hasn't, obviously to do a check, so whether that would be a check in their CGM or a finger prick check to be more accurate, to do a check. And I would say repeat. I would say maybe if you repeat this like 2 to 3 more times and nothing is working, it's not going up and it's just staying the same, or it's dropping even further, then in that case it is definitely 100% an immediate emergency, and you need to take them to the hospital. And a hyper, obviously with that, again, you need to kind of know how high are they, you know, say more than, if they are really high, like more than 13, and you know how long they've been high for, whether like how are they ill, you know, or like you need to understand why, because if you're high because of illness, that can affect it and give you ketones. So if they've been taking their insulin, you know, if they're high because they've eaten something, to say if they're high because they're ill and they, you need to make sure one of two things. One, you need to make sure that they are taking their insulin, even if they're not eating any food. Make sure they do their insulin at the time that they would normally eat. So for breakfast, if they normally get up and eat their breakfast at 9 o'clock, make sure at 9 o'clock they take their insulin and do it that way. Now, based on what insulin they do take, because normally it goes by a carb ratio, and if you're not eating, they should have a plan or something, or a sick day plan that they've been given by a doctor. I know I have one somewhere lying around that should tell you that should tell them how much insulin to give based on how high their sugars are. And you also need to make sure you're testing for their ketones, and this piece of paper will have all of the details about that. So you need to make sure that you're helping them, because if they're really ill and it's an emergency, they're not going to want to do all this. So you have to be that person to read this and check it, make sure you're helping them, that they don't go into DKA and have high ketones and end up in the hospital. Now, obviously, going by that, if you are still a bit unsure and they're a bit out of it, and obviously take them to the hospital and just kind of explain the situation. And again, the hospital will put them on some sort of fluid or something, depending on how bad it is, to get stuff in their system to kind of to help them out. But one thing is, obviously, sometimes there are similarities with the symptoms between hypos and hypers. So you do your research. You don't need to be an expert, as long as you know what a hypo and a hyper is, the symptoms of each, how each one can affect them, how each one can be dangerous, and how you can help and support. Now, with both of these, make sure you are just kind of supporting them, making sure, checking on them, you're there the whole time, because both can make you feel just as ill. That's what I would say. And obviously, that's what I would recommend. If there is ever an emergency, then you can do that. But always remember, hypos are for sugar, hypers insulin, and that is it. Because I know some people get them both mixed up, and that would be very bad. What treatment options are available? Diabetes cannot be treated, type 1. It is incurable, and there's nothing that can solve it. But in terms of treatment options that can help you manage it, obviously insulin is the main form of treatment that we have, and that will help, and obviously that manages it. But in terms of our health, we do get health checks that can help with, obviously, to see how well we are managing it, and to make sure that everything is as it should. So our eyes, our feet, obviously all of our organs inside, nothing is just kind of being affected. So there's that. What devices can help with it? So there's CGMs, which help track your sugar levels and everything, and then there is also insulin pumps, which obviously stop you from having to do injections all the time, and they deliver your insulin based on your how much carbs you eat. So there are things that can help, like treatment, things like that can manage it, but not like in terms of the way that you've kind of asked, if that makes any sense. Your symptoms before you found it out. So it's a bit of a long one. My symptoms was that I was getting excessively thirsty. I was constantly needing a drink. I'd literally 2 seconds after I'd had a drink, I'd need another one, and then I was constantly using the loo. Tiredness, fatigue was another one. I was always just falling asleep everywhere. I didn't notice that one. My family, my partner did. When I was on holiday, they noticed that I was constantly falling asleep everywhere. And now I kind of look back, I don't see that much myself, but maybe a little bit. I was constantly, I would say headaches. I would get them a little bit, but not that much. Excessive weight loss. Now I look back, I know that was there, but I didn't see it at the time. My vision would go in and out a little bit, but that's not something that was a major bit that I'd notice. It would be all the other things I'd notice. I would say that's kind of all of the symptoms I had. So if you get any of those symptoms, then definitely go and see a doctor as quick as you can, straight away, and just tell them the situation. How do you manage alcohol? One thing with alcohol is hypos can look as though you're drunk. They can appear as though you have just had a bit too much. So if you are going out drinking with someone who is type 1 diabetic and they appear to be drunk, just check that it actually is them being drunk and it's not a hypo and they need to be treated quickly and they need to eat sugar. So just make sure you distinguish that before you go and give them loads of sugar. That is a major important thing. In terms of managing alcohol, there's a specific rule that we have to follow, which is that we have to make sure that before we go out and drink, we need to eat something. We can't drink on an empty stomach. We need to have some kind of food. And that's kind of a generic rule, I'd say, of drinking, but for us, that is extremely important. Another thing is knowing how different alcohols affect us. Depending on what alcohol you drink will depend on what it affects you. So the alcohol I know would spike me up a little bit because it's quite sugary, because I drink ciders, and then it would drop my blood sugar. So you can drink, obviously, you know, drink as much as you want. You don't have to worry, you know. Obviously, as I've said, over drinking, when I said about avoiding I can't remember what it was, avoiding something, and it's to do with alcohol. Now we can drink and go out for a night out, but another thing is before we go to bed, we have to have something carb wise. So whether that's a piece of toast, you know, or whatever else, we need to eat a carb based thing. It doesn't have to be a meal, it can just be something carby, because during the night our blood sugar, our body will be trying to get rid of all the alcohol out of our liver and give us sugar to kind of, you know, and give us and produce little bits of sugar, and our body can't do both. So it'll work on getting us obviously out of the alcohol of our system, so it won't focus on that, which means that we could drop in a low in our sleep and everything. So we need to make sure that we have something carb based before we go to bed to stop that from happening, and not drink on an empty stomach. But apart from that, we can drink. So people kind of don't realize that, but it also is understanding what alcohol we drink and how that would affect our levels. So that's kind of it, I would say. What happens every day with food? So this is a good question. Now, what happens is that every time we're about to have a meal, we have to check our blood sugar, and depending on if we're in range, then that is fine, we just give our insulin. If we are still a little bit high before we eat, we have to give ourselves extra insulin as a correction on top of what we're giving it for the food. And we don't just inject it for the food, you also think about what we're doing afterwards. So if we're about to have a really big breakfast and then go on a really big hike, or something like a really kind of long hike up a mountain, that is going to drain our energy, which means that is going to drop our blood sugar. So we don't want to overcorrect, we don't want to do a correction dose for that food, because we know that we don't want to kind of overgive the insulin if we know we're going to be doing something that's going to drop the insulin afterwards. So if we're already high, just do your normal insulin, and then yes, you'd go higher, but then if you're going for the walk, that would drop it down anyway, you know, kind of something like that. So you think about the situation we're going to be in after we eat, and you know, obviously, and then that would be it. Now, in terms of snacks, we can still have a little bits of snacks. They always advise if you don't eat too much, but you can have little kind of carby snacks in between meals if you're really kind of hungry. Now, I don't snack as much as I used to, if I'm honest. I will sometimes just have like a digestive or something in between meals, but that's about it. That, in terms of food, that is kind of it, really. Now, I have not got to this part yet, but we make sure that we carb count based on what food we're given. So we are given a ratio, which is every 1 unit of insulin we give equates to a certain amount of grams of carbs. And then we base that on the meal, and there is certain foods that do affect blood sugar and there's certain foods that don't. So I heard that mayo and butter, things like that, do not affect my blood sugar, but obviously something like bread, you know, chips, like potatoes, bread, that affects my blood sugar. So that's kind of what happens every day, depending on what you eat. So if I am obviously making myself just a sandwich at home and having like a little bit of a light lunch, compared to if I was going out to say like fast food or somewhere, it would be completely different. But that's kind of, hope that kind of explains it. What causes it? Is it your birth, from birth? Sorry. Is it genes, things like that? No, it is from obviously your body attacking itself. Sensors to track blood sugar level and what was your opinion and your experience. So I'll explain. So CGM sensors, continuous glucose monitoring systems, they are basically, you put them, they go under your skin, and they measure your interstitial fluid, which is a different thing to your blood sugar. But so that's why when you have them, they are about 20 minutes ish behind your actual blood sugar, which you can get through your fingers. So it's always advised with sensors that you make sure you test if something doesn't feel right and you don't match. If your symptoms of how you feel and what your sensor says do not align, if they're not communicating, is what I like to say, then you test. Now, sensors, well, my opinion is obviously that they are one of the greatest things are made. You don't have to constantly prick your finger. They really help because they can help you keep on top of trends, help you make choices, and you can kind of use it to see how certain foods affect you, and you can look back on it as well. And on my app you can make notes about what foods you eat, how much insulin you gave, how much carbs you had, so that, and like the time of day. So that's what my opinion on it is that you can use that for your advantage, because with mine, I like to add what foods I eat, how much insulin I give myself. So say when I do start my carb counting and I go back, I can kind of look back on everything and say, like, look, this is how much insulin I gave for this is how much carbs it had in it. So if I eat this again, I know that's how much to give, because that's how much I had, or if I have something similar to that. So you can kind of look back on past events as well. And it also, you can use it to kind of track your daily patterns, things like that. So they are such a good thing. But obviously they do have their moments when they don't work or they don't align with how you feel and what they tell you. You can set alarms as well. So if the sensor stops working, or if you go above a certain point, below a certain point, then it will go off, the alarm will go off. My experience has been pretty good with them so far. I have had a couple of dodgy ones that have fallen off, like, or just come off. I've had a couple of bleeders, you know, some that have been quite a little bit dodgy to start with, but I haven't, apart from that, my experience has been mainly good with them, and I would recommend them. As soon as I was told I could get one, I was very happy because I knew it would help me. I was scared of it at first, knowing, like, you know, how to apply it, how do they work, like what do they do. It's just so much different to finger pricking, and now it's probably one of the greatest things I've got, because it really does help me manage my sugar levels. And the one that I use is the Libre, but there are different ones that you can use out there depending on what your healthcare provider tells you. Mine provided the Libre for me, but I know some others may recommend other ones like the Dexcom. I know people use, etc. But, you know, I would say that they are really good. And when you do get an insulin pump, they can connect to that as well. So your insulin pump can use it to check what your blood sugar level is, and then that can give you insulin based on what it says. If you're like, you know, if you're not, you know, if you're like kind of in the night, it'll just give you it. So yeah, that's what I would say. I have had a positive experience with them, and my opinion is probably one of the greatest inventions, as well as obviously insulin and the pumps you can get. How does it affect you if you want to have children? Now, obviously, this is a topic I don't know a lot about. I know I've only been told like one or two things by my local diabetic nurse. So I don't know everything on this topic. If there's anyone that's diabetic and they've like type 1 diabetic and they've had kids, you know, like your experience. But obviously with me, I don't know, because I've obviously not got any children and I'm not planning on doing that anytime soon. But what I've heard and been told is if we want to have children, we have to make sure our HbA1c level is really low. So that is basically how much sugar is attached to our red blood cells. The more you have, the worse your level is, and that tests when I go to my diabetic clinic every so often, they test that to see how I've been managing my diabetes over the past 3 months. So it's a true test of, are you managing it, and or are you lying and saying that you're managing it and you're actually not. And if you want to get pregnant, you have to talk to your healthcare provider to say, look, I am wishing to plan a pregnancy, and they will do this test and see how low you are. And the lower you are, the more chances of it being a healthy pregnancy and there's no miscarriages or complications, because the lower you are. And I know that you also get monitored quite closely, because obviously your body, you share your food with your baby, so your sugar would be shared with that as well. So you would be closely monitored with that. And obviously because of stress, like, you know, because with pregnancy you can get stress, obviously pain, anxiety, if illness, obviously with morning sickness, things like that, which can affect your sugar. So there's a lot of different aspects of pregnancy that can affect it, so you need to be closely monitored. And obviously childbirth would also give stress on your body, so that might stress on your sugar levels. So with that in mind, other than that, I don't really know. Until I actually go through it myself, I genuinely have no idea. And there's a lot of other factors with diabetes, like driving, going on holiday, things like that. But in terms of like what we do with different things. But yeah, so with that in mind, I feel like that is everything. So obviously I feel like that has been quite a lot of the answers to my questions. A lot of people had a lot of generic knowledge. I feel like hopefully I've helped these people that have said the responses, as well as I hope I've helped anyone watching this who doesn't really know much about this topic and wants to kind of know a little bit more or expand the knowledge on it. So I hope I have helped and kind of taught a little bit about this subject as well. It is like a full-time job to manage this, but I hope you like this video and I hope this has helped. And obviously it's one of the subjects I am going to continue raising awareness about, continue talking about, so that there's no stigma, there's no confusion. But I hope you enjoyed this, because I really liked doing this video. And also please like this video and subscribe if you're not already. And yeah, I will see you in my next video. Bye.